This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and this episode is brought to you by Silna Health. That's S-I-L-N-A, the premium front-end RCM company that leverages technology with a team of onshore insurance experts to handle benefit checks, eligibility checks, and prior authorizations. Finally, a vendor that you can trust, like a full-time employee that scales with your business. Just mention the Profiles in Leadership podcast to receive a free trial. Today, our guest is Kathy Mairella. She's been a physical therapist for 46 years. She graduated from Boston University and then received her doctorate degree in physical therapy from MGH Institute of Health Professions in Boston. She retired from her career in 2022, where she was the director of clinical education and the assistant professor at Rutgers University School of Health Professions, Doctor of Physical Therapy programs. She's been very active in APTA and served many years as a director on APTA's board of directors and many other elected committees, task forces, and lots going on in the APTA. She's won countless awards, including a Catherine Worthingham Fellow of APTA and the Lucy Blair Service Award. She's had multiple peer review articles and presentations, and I'm just barely touching on her curriculum vitae. So, Kathy, you've had an amazing career, and I know you're still active in a lot of ways. So, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks, Steve. I'm happy to be here.
So, how's retirement going?
Retirement is really interesting. It is. I don't think I've had it. I don't think I have it figured out yet.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it tremendously. I think the challenge is to figure out how engaged I still want to be, because I still want to be engaged. But figuring out what's appropriate. But it's good. It's good. Doing a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, and I think it gives me an opportunity. When you're reading off the list of my CV, it gives me a lot of opportunity to reflect on that and sort of figure out what's next.
It's been an amazing career, and I've known you for quite a while in many different ways, and so it's great to sit down and just have a chat with you. Now you have moved, so you got to had a remodel project going. So are you done with that? And
We are.
where do you reside now in your retirement years?
Yeah, I live in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. We had a house there for almost 25 years. And when the pandemic hit, we decided to spend some time at our second home. I really hadn't planned retirement, but then it just felt right. And so I made the decision to retire, and then we needed to turn it into our permanent home. So it's been exciting. It's been quite an interesting 4 or 5 years, but we're really enjoying it. Yeah.
The beautiful part of the world, that's for sure.
It is great. Yeah. We keep pinching ourselves that we actually live there. Yeah. So it's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So when you look back over your career, and most of it was spent in the academic world, correct?
About half of it. Yeah.
Half of it. Okay.
Mhm.
What did you notice at the early part of that academic career versus when you just retired? How's the curriculum changed? How have the students changed? What was different? How did it evolve over those years?
Yeah. So I did have a whole history of clinical practice that sort of got me to the point where I stepped into academia. So I kind of have always considered myself a square peg in a round hole. I don't think that I've necessarily done things in a traditional way. So becoming a faculty member was almost a later in life decision for me, because I was really trying to pull things together. And so I did some adjunct teaching before I became a faculty member. So I would say it's probably about a 20-year span from when I started to when I retired. And I would say classes were much smaller. We had an opportunity to really get to know those students in a way that I don't think exists any longer with the growth of programs and the class size that have increased. I think the students are different. It is a different generation, right? That 20
Yeah.
years actually spans a generation. So this generation is the digital natives and not the adopters. And so that I just think they interact differently. In some ways, they're more worldly and better informed, but in some ways, I think the the information overload, it makes it harder for them to critically think. So I would say those are some of my off the
Yeah.
cuff observations.
And
Yeah.
so, do you think when you said that they were smaller classes before, now they're bigger classes, we've heard a lot about, there's not enough PTs in the world and so on. So do you think it's a positive that classes are getting bigger, or do you think that the fact that you don't get to know them as well is negative in that sense?
That is a great question. I think the classes have to be bigger to address workforce challenges. I think that we've done a really good job, I think, creating an increased demand for PTs, and now
Yeah.
we're facing this, shortage. So I think they have to be. I think there's an economy of scale in programs. I think that the larger programs are better resourced. Um, but then I also look at, are the students as well prepared in the sense that we have such attrition now out of the profession, and I'm not sure we had that 20 years ago. And I wonder, is that because those students felt more connected? Did they develop that, or is it just the environment? I'm not sure. um,
Yeah, that's
but I do think
interesting.
there was a difference in being able to somewhat personalize the experience for students. I think students are more likely to get lost in the bigger programs.
And I guess I should know this, but I don't, so I'll ask the question.
Mhm.
Is Rutgers a private university, or is
No,
it
it's a state
it's a
university,
state
State
university?
University of New Jersey. Yep.
Okay, so that keeps the cost somewhat down more than maybe private schools, but it's still it's a big nut, right?
Yes, exactly, because it's a graduate program. So, the
Yeah.
students don't have the same opportunities that the undergraduates have in terms of scholarships. And
And when you look at, again, I'm just asking you from your experience because you've lived it. So when you look at a university like that, big brick and mortar place, and there's so much more hybrid programs going on now and whatever, what's the future of those more traditional programs? Do you think that are they going to continue to compete? Are they going to be priced out and people are going to go other places? What do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I do think, I mean, we're starting to see a reduction of applicants to PT programs, I think in part related to the healthcare environment and payment and all of those really important factors. Um, I do think the hybrid programs are going to be more competitive. I think students are looking for work life, I don't know if work life balance or work life integration or what the right term is anymore, but I think being in a brick and mortar program for hours every week, I think that will fade, and I don't think we'll lose that on-site experience, interaction completely because we're a hands-on profession. But I do think that there will be a trend towards um, reduction in time on campus, definitely. And I do think the public universities do have the advantage of being less costly, and so I think that will help. As the private universities often have funding opportunities that aren't available in the public university. So we'll see.
So what does that bode for our profession when, you say that there's less applicants now applying for
Mhm.
school, yet the demand keeps going up. I mean, you and I, I'm sure, can remember the days when people had no idea what physical therapy
Mhm.
was,
Mhm.
and I'm sure some people still don't. But we always hoped for the day that people would injure themselves and have an issue, and they would think, I need to go to my physical therapist. So if we're getting there, if we wanted that, if our dreams were coming true with that, how are we going to support it?
I That's the $1,000,000 question, right? And
Yeah,
I do think we need to be somewhat innovative in the way that we're preparing new graduates to practice in terms of um, really practicing at the top of their license, using their brains and looking at models of care that are provide quality care, but don't necessarily require someone with an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree in order to provide every minute of the direct care. So, so
yeah.
some modification of the way that extenders are used. Um, and then I think we need to fix a lot of the problems that help in the healthcare system to help. And I know that's one of those
Yeah,
huge, enormous, you know, big, hairy, audacious goals. And I don't think
yeah,
PTs are going to do this by themselves. But
right.
I do think that's why we're losing people out of the profession, because we have such a dysfunctional system. And I think
So,
yeah,
yeah, I didn't mention it in the bio, but you were on the planning committee for the Graham sessions, and you've been
yes,
to many, many, many Graham sessions, which is amazing. And was it last year or the year before? We had a very vigorous discussion, debate about extenders. Should we use them? Can we use them? And you just alluded to the fact that if we work at the top of our license, maybe we don't need to do all the things that a lot of PTs think they need to do.
yeah.
So, where are we? Since you're so connected with the movers and shakers in the APTA world, American Physical Therapy Association, what are people thinking on along those lines? Is there still lots of resistance to that, or are people more open to it? Where do you think we're at?
I really don't know where we are in terms of kind of House of Delegates positions, which drive the voice of the profession, APTA. Um, but I think there's definitely, a great awareness of where the problems are. Um, but I don't know. I just find it so interesting. Again, this is my opportunity in retirement to connect the dots and take a step back and look around. And where I live in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, has a enormous geriatric population. It's a really great place to go to retire, and I go to the gym, which I love, and it's a great gym. And it amazes me how many of the people that I talk to there, who are my age, little younger, little older, who are relying on the personal trainers for their advice in how to manage their musculoskeletal conditions, because they would love to go to PT, but they can't get it. There's a 6-week waiting list, and
Yeah,
that's
it's
the
crazy.
reality.
As someone, like yourself that's been in the profession, and I'm a physical therapist as well, so I had an issue that I wanted to deal with, and I'm picky because, I want to get my physical therapist. And so I go through the process. It took me 10 weeks
Yeah,
to get in to see my physical therapist. I mean, that's crazy.
that is crazy.
I just and like you said, it's a healthcare issue because the same thing happens when you need to see a specialist for this or that or whatever, and then,
Hmm.
well, our next available appointment, and you're like, what?
Yeah,
You know? So
it is.
it's
It's really at a pretty critical point, I think. I don't think we're quite at that crisis point yet, but we're getting
yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah. So what's the solution other than using more care extenders for some of the care, which I think most people would probably be okay with? from a patient's perspective, as long as they're still getting the expertise of the physical therapist. But, um, do we need to, have more schools? Do we need bigger programs? Do we need more education at the, high school level so that people are more familiar with the profession? What's your opinion?
It's a great question. I think part of the challenge is that we require many programs, I don't know if all of them do, require students to do some exposure to physical therapy before they apply. And many of them work as aides before they get to their physical therapist education. And so that's their view of what physical therapy is. And I think students come in sometimes with a distorted, unless they get really lucky and find themselves in a really high quality PT practice. I think they come in with an expectation of what it's going to be like, which is, and many of them have been told by their guidance counselors that, hey, you have a guaranteed job for life. Um,
Mhm.
and that's why you should be a PT. And I think, I don't think we, meaning the collective we, well, beyond the, PTs or in academia, I don't think we're doing a good enough job helping students, not preparing them for practice today, but to give them the skills that they need for what's coming in the future. And I think maybe that would help us get the right seats in the program, and also um, keep students in the program if they really feel like they're using their doctoral degree education in practice. And really, I'm just stunned by the number of students who graduate and then I find out, 5 years later are no longer practicing. It's really stunning to me.
What are they doing? I mean, are they just dropped out and I
Selling
mean,
real estate. I mean, some of them are in
really?
healthcare. And the other thing is, a lot of those strong students who stay in PT are not in clinical practice. And again, I think it's great that there are multiple things that can be done with a PT degree. I don't think every PT needs to be in clinical practice. But when we're losing so many to, some of them are doing tech companies, there's a wide variety of other careers that I see entry-level PTs transitioning to fairly early in their career. And again, this is anecdotal. I don't have a lot of
Yeah.
data to support this, but I am often surprised when I see on social media some of my former students and what they're doing and having their stepping out of clinical care.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting dilemma for sure because I think we all know that, you hit the ceiling pretty quick as far as
Hmm.
earnings go. It's a few years out, you get a few raises, and then it's hard to go above that unless you
Hmm.
go into some administrative or um, ownership or some other
Hmm.
role within the profession. So
Hmm.
so I think salaries and payment is all part of that.
Yes.
I'm wondering, too, do you know or do you have any experience? Is that happening too in the physician world as well?
I did find it interesting that I think some of the concerns that we've had over the years in terms of, ownership of practices and stuff are really starting to percolate in the
Yeah.
physician world, in a way that I haven't seen previously. I don't necessarily think physicians are leaving medicine as much as PTs might be. I do know PTs, if they're staying in healthcare, some of them are going into physician assistant programs, nurse practitioner programs, other types of healthcare. But again, many I see moving, like I said, selling real estate, going into some kind of sales, um, other
Yeah.
other areas.
It's it's not always good to compare, but sometimes it is good to compare so you can see what others are doing. But I've kind of felt that that's been true in the nursing world,
Mhm.
way before the PTs have experienced this. In fact, I've always said I've never seen so many nurses in hospital administrations,
Right.
because they kind of get
Mhm.
into the clinical care and then they don't like it or they get
Mhm.
frustrated or it's too hard or they don't make enough money or whatever the issue is. So I think the nursing
Mhm.
profession has had issues with that as well. I think before
Agree.
the PT, yeah.
Mhm.
So now you're retired, so you can say whatever the heck you want. Um, so in a perfect world, in physical therapy education programs, what would you do? What would you keep doing, and what would you eliminate
Mm, great question.
if
Well,
you didn't have CAPT and other things telling you you have
yeah.
to do
Well,
this and had to do that? So,
CAPT's important,
yeah,
but
okay.
CAPT has a, I mean, I think there is important value in,
Sure.
having a level of some level of quality control, and I do think
Yeah.
that is CAPT's role. Um, I would like to see different admissions criteria. I'm not convinced that we're admitting the right students to programs because for so long it was so competitive. And it just got to the point where we were admitting students based on their GPA, their GRE scores, because there were so many students applying that it was just difficult to manage the application process and the admissions process. Again, I think that's leveled off a bit since the applications have dropped. So, when you're admitting all the A students, you are admitting the students who are always looking for the right answer. You're admitting people,
Yeah.
because that's how they got straight A's. Um,
Yeah.
and so I do think that is, admitting the right people who are, um, who, in my mind, see the potential for the future of PT, would be a good start.
And
I
and
do.
it
Mhm.
makes you wonder too, because I've wondered this many times, how many exceptional clinicians um, did we never capture or have we
Oh,
lost because of that? It's kind of
oh,
sad to
so
think about,
many.
right?
It is sad. I served on our admissions committee for a number of years, and it always made me so sad because we did interviews, which I thought were important,
Yeah.
and the program thought they were important. And I interviewed so many what I thought really qualified candidates, and for some time, and we could have admitted like two sets of qualified candidates. Like we had double the amount of people who really would have been great. And I wonder, what happened to some of those really great applicants who didn't make it into the program. So
Yeah.
I think that was unfortunate. Um, then I do, I so my leadership experience, again, I was, square peg round hole. I feel like I really got to exist in different worlds in APTA, that it gave me a really broad exposure to, and I also had multiple practice settings. I do think that there needs to be a more real life connection between our clinical world and our academic world. And many programs are really making an effort to have faculty practices. That's still not connecting
Hmm.
with the world. And that's one of the reasons I was a private practice member, because before I transitioned into academia, I was sort of, in transition. I left a position and I joined thinking I would perhaps open a private practice. I had three kids who were just about getting ready for college. It just was not great timing.
Yeah.
But then when I got into, teaching, it so informed the way that I taught. And so I look at where are the opportunities for better connections between the clinical world and the academic world. I think that would be helpful. And you're bringing in a teaching assistant for a couple hours a week to me is not that's not enough. That's not a real relationship. That's a, so I think that would help. I do think and I know this is controversial, shortening programs, I think would be helpful in reducing cost, although I know prominent leaders in the profession who are much more experienced at this than I am would argue that that really wouldn't help. And I, my real soapbox issue, of course, is reforming the clinical education
Yeah.
system that we've had for 75 years, and we're still doing it pretty much the same way. So,
So again, I'm pushing you here because you don't have to talk to your boss tomorrow. Um, what are you forced? Maybe that's not the right word. What do you have to teach in today's programs that you think we don't need to do? What can you get rid of?
oh,
Because I know that
yeah,
there's a lot of things like, people always come, oh, we need to do this, we need to do that. And from the educator's perspective, it's like we're already doing, we
right.
can't just keep adding on, adding on. We have to get rid of something to include that. So be bold. What can we get rid of?
Um, I think a lot of the procedures classes, I mean, I think we need, the students need, it's a manual profession, right? There needs to be labs that practice hands-on techniques, because otherwise how would you determine competency in those areas? But I think um, teaching things that can be easily, at this point, students are Googling how to do something. I I think they really the focus needs to be on how to think, and that how to think isn't a separate class on critical thinking, because that's what some programs do, right? Like we'll have this whole curriculum and then we'll have a separate class on critical thinking. And I think that the more successful programs will really integrate that within their curriculum. I think many programs still have that traditional model of you take, orthopedic physical therapy and you take neurological physical therapy and integumentary physical therapy, and at the end you pull them together in a case study course. And
Yeah.
I think that's old school.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I always think back, like a staff therapist or somebody in the clinic will say, like be upset when they have more than, maybe two new patients a day or something. And I know paperwork is part of that issue, but, um, in a way, to practice at the height of your, or at the top of your license would be, the major emphasis on the diagnosis part of what we do
Hmm.
and figuring out
Hmm.
what's going on, and not so much the techniques to treat it, although that's important, we know.
Right.
But I just think that maybe there you can flip the emphasis a little bit where it's more about the diagnosis and the critical thinking and the
Yep.
figuring out the puzzle and all that as opposed to the hands-on techniques.
And one thing that is interesting, circling back to what you asked me earlier, when the students come in who have been in practices, they want the hands-on stuff.
Oh,
They
there's
don't
no
want these,
question.
yeah,
No
they don't want
question.
this theoretical stuff. It's not what they expected it to be. And so you're
Yeah.
really facing that challenge between the current and the future.
Yeah, no, it is a dilemma. And I remember back as a student too that no, you want all the tools and you want all the
Yeah,
techniques and you want to be able
the
to do
tricks.
this and
Yeah,
yeah, and it makes you feel like you're really making a difference. But
yeah.
sometimes, looking back on my career, it's like, well, how many, would I have been more effective if I was better at figuring out exactly what was going on as opposed to
Hmm.
treating
Hmm.
what probably turned out to be symptoms or probably turned out to be things that, made
Hmm.
people feel better and helped them. But, could you help them at a higher level if you were a greater,
Hmm.
you know, at figuring out what's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's go back to we talked about the latter part of your career. Let's talk about the earlier part of your career. So you come out and what attracted you to physical therapy, and then what did you love about it in those early years?
Sure. I love that question. So I'm a baby boomer. I was born right in the middle of the baby boomers. So, which was, really interesting time to grow up, and lots of transitions in, just in society, right? I mean, I think I'm probably one of the youngest people who still remember the JFK assassination, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's like this cohort of us who are that age,
Yeah.
and we went through the late 60s and the turmoil in Vietnam, and the role of women just changed hugely. Like when I was in high school, there were no women's sports, and you look at where we are now. So how that relates to your question is, I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher when I grew up, and by the time I graduated in the middle of the baby boomers from high school, um, education was just flooded, and there were the numbers of students had started to drop off, and the number of teachers had increased, and so my dad, who did not go to college, looked and he goes, you don't want to do this. You're never going to get a job. Okay.
Yeah.
So what else am I going to do? And so, yeah, okay. I could be a teacher. I could be a nurse. That's really kind of, or a secretary. Like those are the options. But I loved health. Like I was like,
Hmm.
I think the only one in my high school who loved my health classes. And I had a friend who told me about PT literally. And so I was like, oh, that sounds good. And I look at what students do now to get into PT programs. I was like, oh, that
Yeah.
sounds good. Let me try that. And so
Yeah.
I went to a bachelor's program. So I graduated when I was 21, which blows my mind, right? And so here I am,
Yeah.
this new PT. And I was so lucky. I had a wonderful job in inpatient rehab. And to me, that still was the gold standard. Like when I was a DCE and I would walk into inpatient rehab, I was just like, oh, this was my place. I love it.
Mhm.
Was a great time. It was like the golden age of of PT, and it was really that ability to work with every patient because you had the time, and you would work with every patient individually and figure out what was best. There was no cookie cutter treatment. It was great. And so that was my first position. And again, I also had a great group of people around me, some great examples of leadership, and people who were very involved in APTA, and that kind of got me on the right track with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great story, and it's and that is the beauty of physical therapy is there's a lot of different ways you can practice. Because I look back on my story, and I went to school with a pretty naive idea that I was going to be a rehab therapist
Hmm.
and help all these severely injured paraplegics and quadriplegics and whatever. And my school was right above the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, so I
Oh
got a
yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
exposure to that. Um, and be honest, after a couple of weeks of that exposure, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to
Couldn't
do
do it.
that.
Yeah.
Those people that they're doing God's work. I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So there are different things, and
Hmm.
we all find our way. But I think that's the beauty of the profession that you do have
Yes,
different ways you can go. So
absolutely.
you meet a bunch of people that were big in APTA and believed in it, and so you kind of found your way. So, what was the first thing you did to give back to the profession in that way?
In terms of APTA, I was practicing in home care. I had 3 kids. I did, so home care was my sort of return to practice, and it was eye-opening for me. um, I think every PT should have to do at least a couple days in home care just to see what that was like. But it really drove my interest in policy making, and why were there all these rules about home care? I think I tell one of my favorite stories. I mean, the stories are always great. I was treating a woman who had a hip fracture, and she was transitioning from a walker to a quad cane. And when I got to her house, um, she showed me her cane and she said, "Yeah, the pharmacist taught me how to use it." And I said, "Oh, isn't that interesting?" She had it in the
Yeah,
wrong. She had it in the wrong hand.
of course.
So
Yeah.
here I'm, and I was so naive. I'm like, "Oh, here I'm Kathy. I'm going to go talk to this pharmacist and explain to him, why he's wrong." It did not go well. Just did not go well. And he just didn't care that I had any education or any expertise. And I was just furious. I was really angry. And I still remember reaching out to I was in New Jersey at the time, and I remember reaching out to some of the leadership. And I'm like, "What can we do about this?" And he, of course, was like, "Well, you need to get involved." And so, yeah, so I wanted to be the chair of the special interest group for home health. A friend of mine talked me into running for secretary on the board, which I, again, had no idea what I was doing. But I got hooked. And that
Yeah.
was, yeah, I went from secretary to vice president to president of the New Jersey chapter, and then chief delegate, and then up to the APTA board. So that was sort of it probably started with that pharmacist who called my patient had. It was all
Yeah.
about the patients, right? So, yeah.
And we both know those relationships that you gain while working in those volunteer positions and around passionate people. And, I'm still, they're like your lifelong friends and fun to be around
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
all that. Although, to be honest, those meetings can be frustrating too. Sometimes you're
Oh,
dealing
yeah.
with, people that have a different view of what that job is supposed to be and how to do it. So,
Mm-hmm. 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 Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure that you had some frustration years there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I still, I look, yeah, again, retirement gives you this opportunity to look back and sort of like, "Hey, what was that all about?" And I still remember Ben Massey when he was APTA president, and he would say, you surround yourself with the people who inspire you. And I always remember that. And I would say that to my students, like, if you're lucky, not everybody has a choice, but for the most part, if you're especially if you're coming out of PT school in an area where there's a high demand for PTs, you can choose to surround yourself with those people. And so that kept me going a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, you do get clearer as you age, I think, on things. And
Hmm.
for me personally, it's just uh, I just don't have time for negative energy anymore. It's
Hmm.
like I just don't want to be around people that are always moaning and groaning and
Yeah.
pissy and whatever. It's just like, gosh, I want to be around people that see positive, and it doesn't all have
Mhm.
to be rosy, and we can deal with tough situations, but
Right.
if it's always somebody's fault or always, they're out to get me or whatever, that just gets old, you
Yeah,
know.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. So, what other things are you doing now? So I know that you're working on retirement, but I
I'm
know that
working on it.
you're not 100% retired from the profession. So what are you
No,
doing in the
no, I'm
profession
not.
now
So,
that excites you?
sure. Well, I enjoy my it's so interesting because, again, I have these really diverse interests and skill sets. So, um, you may remember I worked on the APTA bylaws for a couple of years, and we
Now you
actually,
should you should get a medal and a boatload of money for doing that. I'm
and
just
we
saying.
actually, yeah, it was a project. It was through 2019 to 2021, so it was actually a really great pandemic distraction to have to
Yeah.
work on this, right? So, um, but it was a great project because, um, bylaws are the backbone of the organization. It's the contract between the members and the organization. And so it really is important. And it's a snooze for most people. I mean, it really is. But
Yeah.
I tend to be a big picture person. So I was kind of a good person to work on the bylaws. because I could step back and say, why does this matter? Why, why
Right.
are we doing that? So I did that. As soon as I moved to Massachusetts, um, they asked me, could you do our bylaws? So I literally just finished working with Massachusetts on their bylaws. So that was my welcome to Massachusetts
Wow.
experience. So that was fun. We literally,
Be careful
yeah,
what you're known for.
yeah, I know. I know. Like, who would have thought that just, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that. Certainly the Graham session. So when we finished the bylaws was when I was asked to be on the Graham sessions planning
Yeah.
committee, which was so great because it was such an opposite experience than bylaws. I mean, you really
Yeah.
couldn't get any more diverse. I'm also working on the APT reference committee, which also sounds really geeky. Um, but I do think it suits my skills in terms of the kind of problem solving. That's where I'm not all about and the good thing is now with AI, they can figure out the language. They can figure out
Yeah.
the so I don't have to do that. So I enjoy that. I think, I see my role as I've evolved through the later half of my career and now into retirement as being sort of being a helper, a mentor, and so reference committee, I think, fills that. And then after that, I don't know. I'm still
Yeah.
trying to, yeah, and we'll figure that out in a year or two.
So
So,
let's forget about the profession of physical therapy for a minute, and let's just
mhm.
look at you as a person who's trying to retire, and you have a family that's grown up now. What excites you? You get up in the morning. What excites you? What do you want to do? What do you look forward to? Tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, I enjoy it's funny because I've been a PT for all these years, and one of the things I love the most is going to my gym. And again, it's so fun. And it's not medical. It's just a bunch of great people. And so I really am enjoying that. I'm enjoying the, the social, making the effort to get to know because I'm living in a new place. So I'm enjoying the social. And one of my colleagues, when I was retiring, said, what are you going to do when like, she really was questioning, what are you going to do when you retire? Like, she couldn't imagine it. And I said, I'm going to read. I'm going to read the things that I want to read. I was always a reader as a kid. So I have just been loving the availability of things in online library, and read a lot, because I want to, not because I have to. And I,
Yeah,
I cook. I cook. I go to
it's
the
awesome.
beach. It's a good life.
It's interesting you say that, you're in a new community, and even though I think you had that place in your family for a long time.
Yeah.
We had a similar situation, and then we remodeled it and moved out here full time, uh,
Hmm.
thinking it was the greatest thing in the world. And I don't know if you experienced that, but my wife Sharon and I certainly did, where it was like, oh my God, where are our people?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
You're out here. It's beautiful.
yeah.
How could I complain about any of this? But, it just shows how important people are. So,
Yes.
we worked at it and we ventured out a little bit. And so
Hmm.
now we have found our
You
people.
have
But,
people. That's good. Yeah.
I'm sure you're working on that too in a new
Yes.
community that you got to find your people.
Yeah. 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 It's good.
Yeah, that's good. So, um, there's so much to look forward to. I'm just wondering too. Again, you and I are similar in the ways we're trying to work on this retirement thing. I don't know about you, but my efficiency went out the tube when I became semi-retired. It's kind of like I got five things on my list to do today, and I get done with two or three, and it's days are like, well, what happened? I used to do
Yeah.
that before, breakfast.
Hmm.
So I think it's interesting when you have pressures and structures and things. It changes your efficiency if that's important to you to get things done.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think one of the first things that I learned is if I had more than two, and literally silly things like, go food shopping and go to the library and meet somebody for lunch. I had like 3 things in one day. I was like, "How am I gonna do this?" And
Yeah.
it's so silly because you used to do all that stuff and work full
Yeah.
time.
Well,
Yeah.
remember, we used to get so frustrated, those patients, we tried to schedule them and they'd say, well, how about Wednesday? And you go, no, I get my hair done on Wednesday. It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
right.
all day, So, but I guess you can appreciate that more. But it is an interesting
Yeah.
dilemma in the sense
Mhm.
of, there's things that when you're working, you say, but when I'm retired, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do so,
Yeah.
whatever. And
Yeah.
it doesn't always come to be true. You still
Yeah.
but it's great that you're reading, and I myself have been reading much more than I used to as well.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So when you thought about our anticipating our discussion today, what haven't I asked you or what haven't I
Oh.
covered that you think that we should?
Let me see. I had to, I didn't prepare a lot except for, just a couple because that's who I am. I
Yeah.
just yeah, I'm so I'm just looking to see. I told you my pharmacist story. That was one of the things that
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you. I think when you asked me to, talk about my leadership experience and my story, and when I heard you read my CV, I still sit here and go, "Is he talking about me?" Like that,
Yeah.
a lot of that comes from that imposter syndrome that people
Yeah.
talk about all the time. And one of the things that really helped me was, and you might know about this book, Quiet by
Oh
Susan
yeah.
Cain.
Amazing
And
book. Really
it's an
good book. Yeah.
amazing book, right? And it really talked about, and I was already on, the APTA board when I read that book. But I just found it so interesting to read about being a quiet leader and the value of the introvert in a largely driven extroverted world where we really value, in Western society, we really value that extroverted personality. And it just gave me when I read the book and I was on the board, it just gave me a little bit more confidence that, oh, okay, this quiet leader is a thing. And so
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity to raise that. That was
Yeah, and I think it's a perfect example. And working with clients and others, on leadership skills, it's a perfect example of really understanding who's on your team and how to communicate with them and what language resonates with them and how they process things. And that book really opened my eyes to that extreme introvert person. I mean, a lot of us tend to lean a little introverted, maybe a little extra, whatever.
Mhm.
But if you're dealing with an extreme introvert, it's sometimes easy to just say, well, they don't care, or what's wrong with them? Why aren't they excited about this? Or, whatever. And
Mhm.
it really helped me understand that they just process things in a very, very different way.
Right.
And I use the DISC personality
Mhm.
profiles a
Mhm.
lot in my work, and I just think it's so important that you understand those personality types and you talk to those personality types in different ways, and
Mhm.
you allow them to do things in different ways.
Mhm.
Because if you're dealing with a real analytical, introverted type person, and you don't give them the data or the facts that they want, and then you push them to make a decision on the spot, it's a disaster. It's not going to work. So you have to find a way to communicate with them, and you have to understand that personality type to do that. And so
Yeah.
it's yeah, I think
I just
that's a really great book.
Yeah, I just thought it was so interesting to look. I looked back at it a little bit before we started talking, and it's just so interesting to look back. I look at so many of the projects that I've worked on over the years, like in APTA, and so many of the activities involve collaboration, which is great and which is awesome. But you have these group activities that often are really dominated by the extroverted personalities, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we end up with groupthink. That's where, and this isn't my term, this is Susan Cain's term, but that
Yeah.
idea of, the dominating people really leading to a group think process, which, isn't always going to be the best outcome, right? So,
Yeah. And
so
I'm
anyway.
sure you've probably seen her TED Talk too. So
Hmm.
it's hilarious. She comes on stage with that big bag, and she said, my parents said I needed to go to summer camp. And I thought, this is great. So I took a bag and put about 10 or 12 books in there,
Books.
thinking that we were going to go in the dorms or wherever they were staying, the barracks, and read books. I was like,
And
no, that's not what summer camp is like.
yeah,
So
really.
yeah, it's she's great. But anyway, the book's great. It's called Quiet, and if those that are listening are not familiar with her TED Talk is amazing too. Susan
Yeah.
Cain. I think it's
Yeah.
Cain, right? Yeah.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Kathy, at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and so that question is in relation to leadership. What is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Oh, I used my Ben Massey quote already. So that was one of my favorites. I think, I think leadership is it's a process. Leadership is a process. I think that everybody has some degree of leadership involved, whether you are a practicing clinician or
Hmm.
whether you have a formal leadership role. I think it's really critical to, and this is really, it probably is going to sound really trite, but know what your values are. I go back to the story of the pharmacist, and it was all about the patient. It was all about, and when I was on the APTA board, it was all about the member, and really knowing that why of why you're leading. I would say that's the most,
Yeah.
in terms of commonality, I would say that would be my pearl.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's the concept of lead from any level,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't need the title, you don't need,
Mm-hmm.
a position, you can lead. There's great aides that work in our clinics that can lead and do things. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I think the also, it's worth saying too that like having a team of diverse personality types and opinions is very important too. That's why you and I work so well together, I think, like on the Graham Sessions Committee, because,
We're very different.
we're very different. I've gone, hey, we do this, we do that, we come up with these ideas and whatever. And you're like, okay, well,
Let's take a breath here,
let's
Steve.
take a breath and let's make it a little more structured and let's take some time and whatever. And so you need that. And so I think that from a leadership perspective, building teams that you work with diverse opinions and personality types is really in the long run the better way to have success, in my opinion.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. When I was on the APT board, we did a lot of different team building types of activities and with staff, and I still remember, and it might have been the disc profile, but
yeah,
there was a staffer, and he and I were the exact opposite. I mean, we were as
yeah,
opposite, but we had such a great relationship and we would laugh about it because we were
yeah.
just so different. And I agree with you. I think that's
Uh,
critical. I
well,
think
yeah.
in this day and age, people are trying to seek people who are like them, and I do
Yeah.
think there's such value. And
And you have to know too how to talk to them. So if you talk to that person you just described exactly as you would think that you want somebody to talk to you, it's not going to resonate. It's going to go
right.
right over his head. So, you have to think, okay, how can I say the same thing, but in language that resonates with that
Hmm.
personality type? And it takes a while to work at that, but it
Yeah.
makes a huge difference for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Kathy, thanks for being on the program today. It's been fun. I always enjoy my
It was
time with
fun.
you. I can
Yeah,
remember I
thanks.
came to New Jersey once, and
I
and
do. That was very,
yeah,
you were awesome.
well,
Yeah.
that was you were having
That
some.
was a big challenge. Yeah.
That was a big challenge, and I hoped I helped a little bit. I don't think so, but it
Oh,
was
yeah.
it
Oh,
was
yeah, you
nice
did.
to have reinforcements sometimes. So
Yeah, it was great. It was
anyway,
great. It was
well,
very
I
helpful.
always enjoyed communicating with you and sharing stories, and experiences with you. So thanks for all you've done for the profession. You
Yeah.
really are one of those soldiers that has done way, way more than most people, and you should be recognized. And I'm glad that you are somewhat with some of your awards, but I certainly appreciate all you've done. So I appreciate
Thank
your
you so
time
much,
today.
Steve. That was
Okay.
great.
Well, take care and have a good rest of your day. And we'll talk to you soon on the next committee call for sure.
That's right. Pretty soon. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye,
Steve.
Kathy. See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.